The left is targeting equal protection, targeting laws against race discrimination. They think they can discriminate in favor of their favored classes. I was in Minnesota this week. I didn't see Tim WALZ. I was at the Capitol. I didn't see Tim WALZ. I was there with my colleague, Michael Bekesha, who's a senior attorney here at Judicial Watc. Michael had an argument for our client, our taxpayer client, who is challenging a Minneapolis school district contract with the teachers union. And the case is now before the Minnesota Supreme Court. The contract allows for discrimination against white people in layoffs and hiring. It's outrageous. And there's taxpayer standing in Minnesota that allows taxpayers to challenge illegal expenditure of funds, generally speaking, such as a contract that requires discrimination. Among other things, the contract, this is from the lawsuit, the contract provides preferences, protections, and privileges for Minneapolis public school teachers of certain races and ethnicities under a section entitled Article 15, Protections for Educators of Color. There's no similar provision covering educators who are not of color. Under the contract, teachers of color are exempt from defendant MPSs, the Minneapolis Public Schools, seniority-based layoffs and reassignments, which means when layoffs or reassignments occur, the most senior teacher who is not of color will be laid off or reassigned. In addition, the contract mandates that the defendants, the school district, reinstate teachers of color over more senior teachers who are not of color. So they get you coming and going in terms of the racism there. It is outrageously unconstitutional, brazenly illegal, and they want to get away with it. And in court, they've been arguing that our taxpayer client doesn't have the right to challenge this outrageous abuse of tax dollars, running a racial spoil system in Minneapolis using your tax dollars. I mean, what's really outrageous is that Judicial Watc has to come in and do this to try to get it stopped. Where are the feds? Where's Tim WALZ? So the lower court first threw it out, didn't want to deal with it. The appellate court said, of course, there's taxpayer standing for this. So the teachers' unions essentially are all aligned against us in Minnesota. So we're facing some powerful interests. The Minneapolis Public Schools appealed their loss and tried to get now the Supreme Court to shut it down of Minnesota. And so that court is, it has almost all appointees of Democratic governors. But that doesn't mean we're going to lose. Indeed, a Democrat appointee wrote the appellate decision that resurrected our case now that we're trying to defend before the Minnesota Supreme Court. So Michael and I went up to St. Paul, and our local counsel, Dan Rosen, was there with us. And the Supreme Court for Minnesota often has oral arguments in the state capitol there in St. Paul. They have their own courthouse, like the Supreme Court building, and there's an appellate courthouse next door to the Capitol, but they also like to meet in the state capitol itself. Beautiful building, by the way. If you're ever in the area, it's probably worth a visit. And so the government's lawyer made an argument, and then Michael made an argument. So Michael Bekesha ably defended our client, taxpayer, who wants to challenge this illegal expenditure of funds. And here are some highlights from the oral argument before the Minnesota Supreme Court.
Here, what we're challenging is the negotiated term in the contract, which was a process by which Minneapolis Public Schools is making hiring, firing, employment decisions of their teachers based on race or ethnicity. And so the focus is, it could be the rejiggering of the computer systems. It could be the HR, the salary of the HR individual. It could be lists that are created. It's other steps that are needed so that Minneapolis Public Schools can classify their teachers by race and ethnicity. And in the end, you have an expenditure, which you have a teacher that, but for this discriminatory process, would not have a job. And so we are not saying that, having a teacher of a certain race is illegal or is the illegal expenditure. It's the nature of how we get there. It's very similar to the other cases that this court has heard over the years and to an extent reaffirmed or cited to in its most recent taxpayer case.
If I could just interject, of course it doesn't require unconstitutional action, but section 122A.41 subdivision 14A requires the school board and the exclusive bargaining units to negotiate a plan for providing for unrequested leaves of absence. I mean, it seems like, isn't that the underlying legal requirement that the school district is trying to respond to and negotiating with the teachers on this question?
Yes, Your Honor, but if the school district entered into a policy, part of the requirement is to pay teachers, to reach an agreement where teachers are paid. If the school district and the unions entered into an agreement that said all white teachers must work for free, all black teachers get paid X number of dollars, or we will only hire teachers of a certain race, or that we will only teach students of a certain color, or that we'll provide textbooks only to students of a certain color, that would be fulfilling their statutory obligation to meet and confer and negotiate bargain terms. That doesn't mean that what they can do is negotiate for terms that would violate the Minnesota Constitution. And so there are limitations. It is the policy limitations, but it is not the limitations that we're challenging here. We're challenging specifically the process by which teachers employment decisions are being made by teachers. The expenditures that go towards those employment decisions are the expenditures we're challenging. Those are directly related to what we're challenging. And then in the end, what you have is you have the salaries for those teachers, but for this method, but for this process that is discriminatory, wouldn't be paid. And so these cases are very similar to the cases that we cite in our brief.
So you could see me sitting back there. It takes all of my energy not to say something during these arguments, but of course I've been doing this so long I know just to sit and remain calm. But you can imagine hearing some of the justices' questions, and just because they ask questions I don't like, it doesn't mean they're going to rule against us. They're just exploring the various permutations of the legal argument. But in the end, this isn't a disagreement about process that we're using taxpayer standing to try to change. That we, essentially we don't like a law that was passed, and so we're just going to allege that it's illegal and say taxpayers can't spend money on it. That's kind of what the nub of the argument was. In this case, it's obviously illegal to engage in discrimination. So basically running that whole program is prohibited using tax dollars, or you can't use tax dollars to do anything related to that program. And I would hope the court understands that. Otherwise, it's going to be the point of view in Minnesota that taxpayers can't challenge government programs that engage in racial discrimination, division, and segregation, or anything else that is typically prohibited under the 14th Amendment, the Minnesota State Constitution, federal and state civil rights laws. I hope that's not the case in Minnesota. But like I said, the teachers' unions are all opposed to us, very powerful public interests. Minneapolis, the biggest school district in the state, signed on to this. This was the centerpiece of a strike settlement, this provision. So if it were purely law, we know how it'd turn out. But we're not on that battlefield in some ways, aren't we? So you can watch the full argument at the YouTube site of Judicial Watc or on Rumble. I think it's on Rumble as well. And I encourage you to do so. But this kind of goes to a kind of a bigger issue. And I talked about Judicial Watc's book. We are one of the country's civil rights leaders right now, because no one or few are defending the rule of law when it comes to equal protection of the law like Judicial Watc is. There are a few other groups. Ed Bloom has been doing great work. FIRE is out there. And as I say, a few others, but there are a few others. But the few, we happy few, to quote Shakespeare again, are engaged in these battles because the left is targeting equal protection, targeting laws against race discrimination. They think they can discriminate in favor of their favored classes, people of color, or people who identify as people of color, which is kind of mind-blowing in and of itself, isn't it? And it's Judicial Watc in court, whether it be in Minnesota, whether it be in Evanston, Illinois, where they have a reparations program, whether it be in California, where they had quotas be successfully overturned, or Asheville, North Carolina. God bless our friends in Asheville, but we had litigation down there because the city government authorized race-based scholarships. And they settled our lawsuit by taking out the race-based requirements for the scholarship. The left is embracing racial division and discrimination that is unlawful, unconstitutional, and destructive to the American way. And Judicial Watc is front and center in fighting this in Minnesota, in Illinois, in California, in North Carolina, wherever and however. So great piece of litigation, great work by Judicial Watc. Michael Bekesha, to go before a court where, the justices weren't all that friendly. They were polite and professional, but obviously were pushing. He did an excellent job. And so kudos to Michael and kudos to the entire Judicial Watc legal team. It's a team effort here. And, I get to come on and talk about all the great work our lawyers and investigators and other staff do. And we only do it with your support. And if you're not supporting Judicial Watc, I encourage you to do so, because it has results. This heavy lifting gets results. And we're only able to do it with your generous donations. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.